We move on now to a state lawmaker who has a lot of influence over how our taxpayer money is spent. State Senator Holly Mitchell from Los Angeles has made fighting for the poor her life's work. She was elected to the State Assembly in 2010 and to the State Senate in 2014. She's now chair of the powerful Senate Budget Committee. With the governor's revised budget due next Friday, we get a preview from Senator Mitchell about what to expect. KQED politics and government reporter Marisa Lagos takes it from here.
Thank you so much for coming in, Senator Holly Mitchell.
Marisa, it's my pleasure. It's great to be here.
Well, you're chair of the Budget Committee in the Senate, and we're expecting next week the governor to unveil his May revise, where we get a better idea of what he's proposing. I'm curious where you see the big budget showdown this year, and if you think the two houses, which are both controlled by Democrats, are going to be united in their priorities.
You never know till you know. And we'll see. May revise is our opportunity to look at a real budget, in my opinion, after the April numbers come in from everyone paying their taxes. We'll have a better idea of what the state's income really is. And I think I've begun to have preliminary conversations with my colleagues in the Assembly, and I think that there are some kind of above-the-fold issues that are resonating with all of us. The Coordinated Care Initiative, the issue about in-home supportive services and whether we kick the can down to the counties or we continue to pay them at the state level. I'm glad to say we just got we handled the infrastructure issue with SB1. So that's a big, big piece. But there will be any number of critical issues that we have to look at: health care, child care. So there are a number of issues that resonate, I think, with leadership in both houses.
So one of the big legislative fights you've had in both the Assembly and Senate was a repeal of the maximum family grant rule for welfare recipients, CalWORKs. I want you to kind of lay out what that was, and just tell us why that was so important to you as somebody who comes from as an activist in poverty and child care issues.
I worked in the legislature many years ago and was an advocate with the Western Center on Law and Poverty. And I remember picking up and reading the Sacramento Bee the day that then Governor Pete Wilson signed it and said that, it was just one less case of beer a month. And it was this cavalier attitude about the life and struggles of poor people that never left me.
Explain what it is.
Maximum Family Grant, it was a budget deal during his administration that basically said if you're on CalWORKs, you're receiving welfare, cash aid for your family, that if you have another child while you're on cash aid, your grant wouldn't be adjusted. It was a national kind of effort led by the Republican Party, who operated on the assumption that poor women had babies to increase their CalWORKs check. And as I have said publicly repeatedly, I don't know a woman, and I don't believe she's been born yet, who would have another baby for an additional $109 a month. It was a failed policy. 15 states have overturned it over the last 20 years. And all it did in California was push already marginalized poor families deeper into poverty. And so it took us a number of years, but I'm very proud to say that we've removed it.
It seems like your big legislative push this year is more around criminal justice issues. And I noticed that among a package you've introduced with some colleagues includes a lot to reform the juvenile justice system. Can you tell me about maybe a couple of those bills?
I think the general voting public understands that building prisons and incarcerating people for longer periods of time it's not helpful. It doesn't work. It doesn't necessarily make our community safer, and it costs a great deal of money. And so we've seen the reverse. I've not seen that same kind of attitude in public policy shift when it comes to juveniles. And that's been made apparent in the policy committees that we've heard some of these bills so far. So we've got bills that say that if you're a minor, you can't waive your Miranda right, that we don't believe it's appropriate for children under 12 to go to jail. And so there's some fundamental issues where we say children are not pint-sized adults. They have different ages and stages of brain development, and we need to treat them accordingly.
So another issue we've seen a lot of focus on in Sacramento this year is protecting immigrants, and particularly undocumented immigrants, given what's happening again in D.C. And I'm wondering, when you go out to your community, is that a concern you hear?
No question. I represent Mid-City Los Angeles, Little Ethiopia. Large areas of my district are, Latino residents and immigrants from other parts of this world. And I think fundamentally, my constituents and I recognize the value that the immigrant community brings to California in terms of our workforce and in terms of our diversity.
Are you hearing about trade-offs, I mean, in terms of spending, or also these threats we've mentioned about, federal funding? Are people worried about money?
People are worried about the threat. People are worried about living in a country that's based on the sweat equity of immigrants and what our country now looks like in the world's view. People are worried when they hear about ICE raids in courthouses and ICE raids at elementary schools. I co-hosted with the Black social workers a Know Your Rights workshop with ACLU, and the diversity of the people in that room looked like California, and people were asking questions on behalf of each community. And so people I think, have been shaken to their core about really not feeling connected with the new national focus on what it means to be an American, and are thrilled that the California legislature and their leaders are stepping up to defend basic human rights.
Another big issue that you have been involved in is climate change policy. Again, some of that is under attack by President Trump. But there's also been this interesting sort of debate that's come up. It used to be sort of business versus environmentalist, right? And now there's a lot of concerns about environmental justice, that places in the inner city or more rural areas have really felt the effects of pollution and other problems.
When I first ran for office, I have a son who's now 16, was 10. And when I was making my decision, he was about 8. And he made had the most profound aha moment that public policy is not black and white. It's not if this, then that kind of equation. We need jobs. We need communities that disproportionately are impacted by bad air through trucking or what have you. We need all of that to work in a symbiotic relationship. And so it's not if this, then that. And so the manufacturers are coming together with the environmental justice and the traditional environmental groups to have a different kind of conversation. And that is thrilling to me based on the district I represent. And so it's just not that elementary. We've got to come together and have meaningful conversations to target communities that have been disproportionately impacted, as well as recognize that those are the same communities that need the jobs the most.
Well, thank you again for coming in today.
It's been my pleasure.